This is weird.
Let's go.
Hello YouTube community and welcome back to the channel. I'm here with my head of department, my lovely head of department, Mr. Pollard, and we're here to go through some of the A-level texts with you because that's kind of an area that actually we don't see much of on the old YouTube. Yes. We're going to be looking at Frankenstein and Never Let Me Go. So we're first going to start off talking about just summarising the text, what they're about, and then looking at the setting of the two prose texts. So let's start off with Frankenstein then. So okay. Good old Shelley.
Well, yes, what to say? I mean, it's very difficult to give an overview of a novel that's there's so many things going on, there's so much to talk about.
Or one thing, by the way, Frankenstein is not the monster. I think so many people used to think that Frankenstein's the monster and not actually the Victor Frankenstein. So just, sorry, put that out
and
there.
Sometimes the students say it and you pass it by and then you come back and you think, did they say it, did they not say it? And then occasionally, of course, on a tired day, imagine a teacher's tired occasionally, on a tired day we might well also make the same mistake and the students pick up us on it and we mea culpa,
okay.
What can I say? Frankenstein then. Well, I think one of the things to be thinking about with novels is what the novelist's kind of purpose is. And it's obviously, it's a novel that's I guess you could call speculative fiction, you could call it science fiction, you could call it almost Gothic fiction because Gothic was very popular at the time that she was writing. She published it in 1818 originally and then revised it, changed a few important things and think republished in 1831. So obviously it's a sort of, I guess, a 19th century novel, Victorian novel to some extent. And Shelley's very, very interesting background herself. I think her autobiographical context is worth considering. She, obviously, the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote Vindication of the Rights of Woman, so a strong advocate of female equality. So she has those sort of radical ideas. William Godwin was, again, a fairly radical essayist and political writer. So, she had that very strong sort of, I guess, education from her parents, and that comes through in the novel as well. She was married to, very, very young, married to Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was one of the collection of romantic poets.
And you might remember him from GCSE. If you do AQA, you'll see his name come up a few times.
And and therefore, by extension, we're friends with Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and John Keats. And the novel really arose. They had they were in Switzerland. It was, and they were having a competition essentially. These brilliant writers. Shelley was only sort of 17, 18 at the time. And they were having this competition, who could write the scariest story?
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And that's where it came from. So it was a sort of a parlour game, really, a kind of competition. And, what arose out of it is this novel that has really stood the test of time. Purpose, I think she's exploring themes of interest in romanticism.
Because this is a romantic period, really, of writing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Exploring obviously scientific advances. There were all kinds of scientific advances going on at the time. There's a warning of overreaching. What should humans do? What should they not do? If humans are straying into the role of kind of God and creating and reanimating, that's really what Victor Frankenstein wanted to do, was to create a new race. He is given a very strong warning of what happens when you overreach those boundaries. So
what was happening at the time? So we have this idea of science becoming more prevalent in society, and so I suppose it's the idea of it when people started questioning religion and science.
Absolutely, yeah. Inventors like Galvani, galvanism, and they were using electric to get bodies to move, and he famously
was it on a frog?
It was a frog's leg, doing that, with a bit of electricity going through it. Okay, sorry, I'm glad I didn't hit you there.
It's all right.
So there's all of those sort of things going on, really. But I suppose at heart, it's a novel about parents and children. Victor Frankenstein has created this child, and he abandons him. and I suppose it's a warning of what happens there. You know, if you were to do that. I mean, Mary Shelley had lost a child relatively recently, and so you know she knew. I guess that was probably maybe somewhere in her mind when she was writing the novel.
It's interesting. Okay, and Never Let Me Go. What's the summary about Never Let Me
Well,
Go?
Never Let Me Go is also Science and Society. It was written in 2005. Ishiguro has gone on since to be, I think he won, is it Nobel Prize for Literature, I think. Had written a novel previously, Remains of the Day, a very, very famous novel made into a film, great film. Anyway, so this novel, written in 2005, a kind of dystopian novel. Now, dystopias tend to be set in the future, but actually, weirdly, I guess you'd say it's an atypical dystopia in as much as it's written in 2005. I think, just let me double check, I think he said it's set in the late 1990s. Yes, England, late 1990s. And Kathy H. is a clone, essentially, and she's around about 31 years old, so she's recalling her time growing up. A lot of this is written retrospectively. She's recalling her time growing up when their clones were brought up in a boarding school called Hailsham in England, and so therefore I guess the setting is 1970s. Now, what Ishiguro has said that he's doing in the novel, he says actually, you know, a lot of people read it as being all about science fiction, about the, you know, cloning, the Human Genome Project that was going on at the time, fears about genetic modification, you know, all of these issues about, you know, I guess again humans playing God and you know overstepping the mark, you know, kind of moral and ethical issues around cloning. But he's actually said in interviews, yeah, I kind of get that is what I was doing to a certain extent, but you know, he says there's two other ways you could read a novel. One is as an alternate history. What happens if an alternate history is a novel that takes a particular key moment in history and says, well, what if we went down that route rather than that route? Right. What would be the consequences of that? And he says, well, post-World War II, they started doing this obviously much earlier. What would happen if instead of doing most of these things in labs and growing organs, you know, in test tubes and in labs, what happens if we created entire clones, human beings, and then we harvested the organs from them that way?
Nice.
And of course, this is a novel about these clones that are brought up to really just provide, almost farmed, if you like, in order to be harvested for their organs. And obviously, you know, they might donate one, they might donate two without dying. Third one, they're lucky if they continue, and by the fourth, of course, you know, they're not able to function or survive. He says, actually, this is a novel maybe about mortality. These clones are never going to live beyond middle age. Their probably maximum age is going to be 30, 35. So you're halving, if you like, the lifespan. What happens then? How do we as human beings continue to have hope? How do we continue to be positive in the view that we're all mortal, that one day we're going to die?
So now we've gone through the summary of both Frankenstein and Never Let Me Go. We're going to actually talk about the setting of the two prose texts. So let's start off with Frankenstein then.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's an overview for both of the texts. They are both kind of contemporary, so they're written and set round about kind of a time that they were written. With Frankenstein, most certainly 1818, 1831, you know, she's writing about the things that were going on at the time, for sure, you know, the interest in science reanimation that we've spoken about, but also, I mean, she draws upon quite a lot of historical events, literary allusions, a lot of things that were going on kind of around that time.
So she refers to things like Paradise Lost and is it Prometheus and things like that?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, there are a number of things. I mean, I'm just looking at my notes here. Galvani we've mentioned.
The guy with the frog.
That's right.
The guy with the frog.
Frog's legs. And in fact, actually, that segues quite nicely onto another thing that she draws upon, of course, is the French Revolution.
Okay.
Obviously, that's 1789 to 1799, and some critics have suggested that actually the monster, who is kind of outcast from society, is treated abysmally by the vast majority of, well, everyone really that he encounters, gets so angry that he actually, he could be seen as being symbolic of, the working class who were, constantly sort of marginalised from society, increasingly marginalised from society, and then obviously they uprose, didn't they, and they stormed the Bastille, and obviously the Louis XVI deposed, and setting up of a republic, and you've got, I guess, that kind of revolutionary theme kind of runs through the novel, really. What Victor's trying to do is quite revolutionary, and obviously, it's there in Romanticism. The Romanticism is a new way of looking at the world in contrast to the sort of Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Which was kind of popular.
I suppose the monster feels the same way the working class would feel, like abandoned and kind of isolated from society. And
absolutely.
Things. Okay.
He says, inflamed by pain, I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance on all mankind.
Okay.
And, just, one way of looking at it. And obviously, gender's important. We mentioned about the fact that Mary Wollstonecraft was Mary Shelley's mother, who'd written Vindication of the Rights of Woman. I think gender's there as well. In particular, the attitudes of the characters, such as Victor, towards female characters. There's a quotation, and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own. And obviously that idea of her being a possession, this rather sort of patriarchal attitude, women as kind of possessions, that was part of, I think something that she was criticising. I mean, there's a character called Justine in the novel who is, sentenced to death, and, she has no voice, at all, really. And there's a critique of the judicial system and all the rest of it, but I think female characters and the way they're treated in the novel, she's definitely exploring, I guess, inverted commas, sort of feminist ideas.
Yeah.
Obviously, the contemporary literary allusions as well. So, there's the Coleridge allusion to Rime of the Ancient Mariner, to the land of mist and snow, but I shall kill no albatross. And then Goethe's Sorrows of Young Werther. You have, I learned about Werther's imagination's despondency and gloom. And I think what she's trying to do there is she's cueing to what a lot of her readers would have known about and read in and around that time. And for example, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner ends with the wedding guest, describing himself as a sadder and a wiser man. And, almost kind of foreshadows what happens to Robert Walton at the end of the novel, where, after learning of Victor Frankenstein's tale, he has that choice whether he carries on his mission to the Arctic or not. So I think, she's using those, if you like, to add extra meaning to the novel.
Okay.
In terms of historical settings for Never Let Me Go, I mean, if we were to move on to Never Let Me Go, again, reflecting the society in which he's writing, he talks about I think there were references to the Human Genome Project and stem cell research. There's a quotation from the novel. I saw a new world coming rapidly, more scientific, efficient, yes, more cures for the old sicknesses. Very good, but a harsh, cruel world. It's this idea that maybe the clones are just for a function, really, that the harvesting of their organs, is a pretty cruel world. But in this world that he's created, cancer's basically been, eradicated. Many really awful diseases have been eradicated because of these, because of the stem cell research, because of the clones' existence. The idea that actually they're sacrificed for man's advantage, and obviously there are some connections that one might make there with Frankenstein as well. One of the things that there was an interest in the 90s and 2000s was, the idea of almost kind of engineering babies, that if you put certain DNAs together, you could eradicate certain diseases. You could choose, for example, maybe if you had sex at a child, maybe their eye colour and things like that. And obviously, that again links with Frankenstein, doesn't it? The idea of them, mankind kind of playing God and overreaching. That's similar to what Victor does. There's a character who's mentioned called James Morningdale who basically goes too far with this, and then there's a backlash against clones and cloning and the existence of schools like Hailsham where they try to educate them to be almost kind of human, and they just want them almost back as battery farms. They're not interested in seeing where the organs come from. They just want the organs themselves. In terms of historical setting, and they're massively contemporary. I mean, you've got the mention of Woolworths, which existed at the time.
Good old Woolworths. They don't know what Woolworths is.
I know what Woolworths is. Of course they don't. Yeah, you'll need to Google it.
Yeah.
Get on Google and Google Woolworths.
Google. Oh,
yeah,
Woolworths.
Yeah. The old pick and mix.
Yeah. Oh my God, I was going to say the same thing.
The pick and mix.
Oh,
do you remember?
W.H. Smith isn't the same.
No. Anyway, a moment of reverie there. There we go. Good old Woolworths. There's pop group posters, second-hand bookshops, and all the rest. It's just recognisably England of the 1990s, and I think both novelists are going to quite great lengths to make sure that they're rooted in the now, in the history. Okay. They go on, of course, to use geographical stuff as well, geographical references.
So do we think that some of the things that Shelley was talking about are apparent in our society today, would you say?
I suppose in some ways, a concern for those who don't have a voice, those who are disenfranchised in some way. I think the anger of the monster, from being disenfranchised, from being treated as an outsider, and it's the same with the clones as well. They're outsiders. They're outside looking in.
And I suppose that is more relevant today in the sense of there's so many people or groups that are feeling like outsiders because of religion or how they appear. And I think that's kind of quite similar to how the monster feels, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And that causes him to do things that,
Yeah, well, he seeks revenge, and the feelings of what it is to be so angry that you wish to seek revenge. Obviously, that you see all of these sort of things happening in today's society. With the clones, they're outsiders as well. You feel desperately sorry for them because they're kind of conditioned to kind of accept their lot, as it were. Which is some ways how people can feel today, even in schools. I suppose certain students may feel that they have been. You pick your options, and then you go and you kind of feel like your life is kind of planned out for you in that sense. So yeah. Yeah, and destiny is important in both the novels as well. The idea that it's kind of laid out for them, and they have little, if any, choice over the way things are going to go. I mean. There are instances in Never Let Me Go, and they're stood outside like a modern office, and it's a sort of glass-fronted office that goes right down to sort of pavement level, and you can see them, and they are describe how their noses are pressed up to the glass, and they're looking in and watching these people working in this office, living normal, inverted commas, normal lives, and just that sense in which they are separated from it. They can see it, but they're never going to be able to be a part of that as well. And it's one of those, exactly, it's one of those moments, several moments that are kind of really heartbreaking in the novel. You really feel for them that, they want to be as human, they want to be human, they're learning, kind of conditioned at Hailsham how to be human, but they're never going to be human.
Same like with the monster.
Exactly, they're just outsiders, ostracised from society, One of the things we might look at is kind of setting the symbolic settings.
Okay.
There are quite a few. Both Shelley and Ishiguro are using their settings in a symbolic way, i.e. to represent something or that's not literally there. So, for example, in Frankenstein, there's mentions of the Arctic. You know, the mention of surrounded by ice which closed the ship on all sides, lost among the distant inequalities of ice, is in part a reference to Rime of the Ancient Mariner, but it's also, you know, a theme of isolation, you know, which is very important in the novel, and of course is really important for a Gothic novel. You know, the idea that, you know, these events often happen a long way from you know, sort of society.
The power of nature was something that was very important to them as well, because even when reading Shelley's poems like Ozymandias and poems like that, it's always coming back to man's power not always being as powerful as nature.
Absolutely. It's there in the prelude. There's an extract from the prelude, isn't there, in one of the anthologies, one of the poetry anthologies at GCSE. You know, and Wordsworth goes out, you know, on his boat, you know, and
thinks he's all powerful.
He's all powerful, and then, you know, he's under one of the beautiful mountains in the Lake District, and he realises, I am insignificant. And I think that's it. One of the ideas that's in the novel is you know, maybe pantheism, the idea that you can see in nature God's creation. You know, so I think that's important. You know, that's why there's so many references to nature there, because, you know, we're supposed to look at nature and just appreciate it for what it is. I think it's sometimes referred to as the sublime. You know, just being in awe of nature and realizing that, you know, a God that could create that, you know, we have to be absolutely respectful of and impressed by.
And I suppose Victor Frankenstein isn't, and that's why I suppose he has these consequences of trying to mess with the natural order in that sense of things. Yeah,
absolutely. And when it gets to his worst stages, he goes back to nature. You know, he allows himself to be kind of led by the wind on his boat on Lake Geneva and so on and so forth. You know, the idea that actually, in the scheme of things, he doesn't have control over his destiny. That is God that controls that.
I suppose you're saying with the symbol of the Arctic as well, that's again nature controlling them, because obviously they're
absolutely surrounded by ice.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, it's folly to think that, you know, we're going to be able to go off and do this, that, and the other, but actually, deep down, God's in control of it. That's the kind of idea behind it, anyway.
Okay.
So lots of symbolic settings. A lot of symbolic settings in Frankenstein are kind of Gothic ones, to make it seem more and more like a Gothic, you know, kind of science fiction novel. Never Let Me Go. I think it's really clever what Ishiguro does with some of these. Yeah, the references to edges. You know, we were once again at a cliff edge. It's this idea that there always seem to be kind of almost on the edge of something, maybe falling off the edge of sanity, because they realise they lose it, because they realise that, you know, that they're not going to live very long.
Okay.
Or, you know, that sort of liminal space, that sort of edge of life and death. You know, they go and visit an old boat later on, and the boat is this kind of beached boat, and, you know, some people have said, well, that's symbolic of, you know, the River Styx, which was the mythological river that flowed between you know, souls. When people died, their souls were carried across the river by the boatman, the ferryman called Charon, and some have seen the boat as being symbolic of that. So again, more references to death.
Right.
Kingsfield, where Tommy is sent to do his sort of final donations, you know, is described as being out of the way and awkward to get to, and I think you know, that's important, because it's again the idea that the public want these clones kind of out of their sight, really.
Right.
They don't want them around.
That's like supposed to be Frankenstein, the monster.
Absolutely.
In the sense that they didn't want him around either.
Absolutely. And there are references to trees. You know, there's sycamore trees. You know, we park beside a clump of sycamores. You know, sycamore is sometimes seen as being symbolic of clarity and clear-sightedness. It's sometimes seen as being symbolic of death. And there's lots of references to narrow places. When I look back over the novel to kind of put you know, this presentation together, there are loads and loads of references to narrow places, and that goes back to the point we were making before, that actually their lives are kind of laid out for them. They don't really have much leeway to move, to turn around, and to go off on a different course or a path that's kind of laid out for them. And that idea of predestination, fate controlling, again, is another connection that you can make with Frankenstein.
So now I'm going to look at some of the connections between the setting of both Frankenstein and Never Let Me Go. So what would you say is the main kind of connections between them?
Well, as we've said, I mean, the settings are used to show that both the clones and the monster are outsiders. You know, so I referenced the office that they were looking into in Never Let Me Go, but also you know, the fact that the monster is required to stay in a place looking at the de Lacy's cottage, but never, well, not never, but he does approach it, but then of course that breaks the spell. So that idea that they're vicariously living their lives through other humans, you know, or through humans. Obviously, there's I would say a difference is that in Shelley's, in Frankenstein, Shelley's using these sort of much grander settings, so Mont Blanc, Lake Geneva, and so on and so forth, to perhaps convey her messages about romanticism, and pantheism, whereas I think they're on a smaller scale in Never Let Me Go. Both of them, interestingly, use fog and mist, but in slightly different ways. So they're using the weather to represent the kind of feelings of the characters.
Right. And supposed to be obscure in the sense of their life and their direction in that sense.
Exactly. You know, sometimes we call it pathetic fallacy. You know, so for Shelley, you know, there's lots of Gothic, you know, ways. You know, the idea of the monster appearing out of the mist to give it a sense of mystery. Whereas in Never Let Me Go, when Kathy refers to mist, it means that she can't really remember things very well. Right. It's a retrospective narrative, but it tells us as a reader, oh, well, this next bit, I might not have remembered this quite right, though I'm going to pretend that I have. Okay. I think, yes, we've mentioned, haven't we, that they're both kind of outsiders looking on. I think nature is presented as kind of comforting and soothing in Frankenstein very often, you know. But I think something almost in Never Let Me Go, it's seen as being kind of a fearful adversary, almost terrifying.
In Frankenstein, doesn't the monster die by just basically walking out into the ice and then
That's right.
dying?
Yeah.
So it's kind of him returning to nature in that sense.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, Never Let Me Go, sometimes nature is seen as being fearful. There's the woods behind Hailsham, where there are all of these horrible stories of what's happened to previous Hailsham students, you know, going off there and being, you know, murdered or whatever.
Right.
So both of them, as we said, use really sort of familiar and real settings, and both of them use kind of these contemporary references and allusions to make them clearly recognisable as places for the contemporary audience. But then obviously with a twist, isn't it? Some odd things go on. I think both of them use these kind of settings, what we might call liminal settings, sort of on the edge of or on the cusp of two things. So for example, just looking at my notes, in Frankenstein, she's using the blurring of the boundaries between life and death. That's clearly a Gothic technique. Yeah. You know, Ishiguro uses seasides. So the idea, the liminal space between land and sea.
That's the edge you talk about as well.
Yeah, the cliff edges. Yeah. There's also fences as well. At the very end of the novel, Kathy's at a barbed wire fence, and she's looking out on this field, and there's all this rubbish blowing against it. But this idea of she's fenced off from society, obviously to show that they're kind of outsiders. That's probably about it. Yeah. Okay. In terms of just setting, but obviously we'll maybe have a chance to have a chat about some of the other things that are covered in these two novels.
Your brain is amazing, by the way. So that's the setting of Frankenstein Never Let Me Go. We'll be doing more videos looking at kind of saying like characters and themes, and maybe even trying to think about how you would go about answering a question like this.
Absolutely,
the comparison question. But yes, I hope you enjoyed. You can all probably find the podcast version of this also on the website www.educatedminds.co.uk, and if you have any questions that you'd like to ask me or Mr. Pollard, probably Mr. Pollard, you can leave it in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel. So you also have a channel now as well?
I do.
What's
And we will put it at the International Teacher. is my Twitter, and we'll put it beneath this so that you can access it from there.
See, look at you know.
Hey, I'm getting done with it. I've been taught by the best.
Oh dear. So yes, so don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and also subscribe to Sir's channel as well. Until next time, we'll see you very soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.